Here are two facts you should probably know. 1. When a human being is driven into a corner, you should never underestimate the levels of stupid and dangerous they will resort to in order to escape. Fact the second, if a deal seems too good to be true, it is. Normally, I wouldn't be the kind of guy you should be taking advice from. If I wrote an autobiography, it'd be called Jesus Wept. But in this very specific instance, I have some valuable experience. It started, as most tragic stories tend to, with a series of short-sighted mistakes. About a decade or so back, I was a few years out of college and trying to build a life for myself. I was single, educated, and driven, all the qualities someone needs to succeed in life. Well, not the single part, but you get the idea. I had prospects, some real potential, but, like Oscar Wilde once said, I can resist anything except temptation. Yeah. I was an English major. I didn't get hooked on meth or porn or anything like that. No, my vice was the thrill of chance. Gambling was the greatest rush I'd ever experienced. Just giving up control, letting the gods of probability and randomness decide your fate. I got hooked, kept going to those damn casinos night after night. Looking back, I was naive, I was foolish. It'd take an idiot, blinded by a lust for sensation, to not realize another crucial fact. The house always, I repeat, always, wins. To make a long, painful story short, at the tender age of 24, the local pit bosses had taken me for all I was worth, and then some. As a result, I was indebted to some unsavory characters who were not all that keen on giving me some leeway on the money I owed them. I managed to pull together just shy of $100 in a week, doing odd jobs, but that was a fraction of what I was in for. At the time, it seemed like a better idea to just piss away what money I had at a local bar rather than carrying on my sad little exercise in futility. So that's exactly what I did, and by virtue of a few gallons of the cheapest spirits you can possibly imagine, I can't remember a great deal of what happened after that. Next thing I know, I'm waking up in a puddle behind the bar, having been turfed out for making an ass of myself. The electric buzz of the neon signs above my head felt like I was taking a power drill to the frontal lobe, while the cold, filthy water below my face helped to sober me up a smidgen, just enough to make me aware. It was right then, in my lowest possible moment, that I met him. "Hey there, buddy," he said, his voice pleasantly cheerful and melodic. "You look like you need a helping hand. Thankfully, I've got two." There was a gentle tug on both of my shoulders, pulling me upright. He leaned me against a wall. I could finally take a better look at him. To begin with, I wondered if I was hallucinating. He seemed so strange, so out of place. My good Samaritan was about 6.5 feet tall, but he was built like a pack of uncooked spaghetti. A long, lean string bean of a man. That being said, the black and white pinstripe suit he was wearing still somehow managed to be form-fitting, like it was just painted directly onto a featureless body. Above his collar, fastened to the top button and held in place by a large and ugly bow tie, sat a pale, grinning head with black hair parted in the middle. Truth be told, my initial thought after properly taking in the sight of him was as follows. Holy shit, I died in that puddle, and this is death himself come to collect my pathetic soul. Sadly, that was not the case. I was, in fact, still alive. "There we are, pal. That's a lot better, isn't it?" he said, kneeling down on his long, rail-thin legs to look me in the eye. "We'll have you feeling like $1,000,000 in no time. Never fear," he added. While back then I just assumed that it was my drunken mind playing tricks on me, I remember his eyes seeming strangely yellowish. They had a kind of jaundiced sheen to them, like sclera and iris just melted together into a single, formless mass. Eyes like goddamn egg yolks. "It's always such a shame to catch folks in a pickle, such a shame," he said, largely to himself, I think. "Whatever happened to helping people out, you know? It's a good feeling." "Who are you?" I managed to choke out. The kind stranger smiled and turned his sulfuric eyes towards me. "You're asking the wrong person there, amigo. I'd tell you if I knew. Honest," he replied with a laugh. "What's your name, though?" "Nate," I said, wondering if I was about to vomit or not. "Nate Wilson." "Oh my God, that's such an awesome name," the stranger said, as the sudden explosion of interest on his face told me that he wasn't faking his misplaced enthusiasm. "Nate Wilson. It has a ring to it, don't you think? God, what a great name. You're a lucky guy, Nate. Lucky to have such a great name." Thanks, I guess." I nervously replied. There was a long, awkward silence after that. I sure as hell didn't know what to say, and the stranger seemed more than content to just stand there and stare at me, grinning like a freak. It felt like it was my responsibility to break that irritating silence. Look, I really appreciate you helping me, buddy, I began. Wait, you consider us buddies? He asked. His tone was, at that stage, ambiguous. I mean, you saved me from breathing alley water, so I guess so, yeah. This might seem hard to believe, because I definitely didn't believe it at the time, but the stranger literally jumped up into the air and whooped loudly. A grown man, behind a dive bar, doing that. It was like something out of a strange dream that your one boring friend always wants to tell you about. This is fantastic, he said, grinning ear to ear like he just won the fucking lottery. It's so wonderful to make new friends. He extended a spindly arm towards me, his hand open and his spidery fingers outstretched. Put her there, friendo, he said. And because that night wasn't weird enough already, you better believe I did. That's what I'm talking about, he said with another childish cackle, pulling me to my feet with disarming levels of strength. Through the power of friendship, anything is possible. Sure, he may have spoken like his only experience with the outside world was watching Saturday morning cartoons, but he seemed innocent enough. A benign weirdo, just trying to help people along his way. Though I must admit, the fact he was reluctant to tell me his name was somewhat of a red flag for me. Now, I'm going to be completely honest with you, Nate, he began, his amber gaze turned downwards in what might have been embarrassment. There was a reason I followed you out here. It wasn't just a stroke of good luck. My heart immediately sank. I knew he was too good to be true. This was when he stabbed me, cut me up, wore my skin as a suit, and turned the rest of me into a makeshift lasagna. Nobody was ever that happy at that hour of the night if they had all their psychological ducks in a row. Well, if you're being honest, I said, swaying on my feet, still too drunk to defend myself, would that reason happen to be my murder? He seemed shocked at first, then began to laugh. Do you think a murderer would be this friendly? He asked. Molestation, then? Jesus, no way, Nate. You're a good-looking guy. Don't get me wrong, but you're not really my type. Then what does a guy like you have to do with a guy like me? I asked, the needle on my internal emotive scale creeping from curious to irritated. Well, he paused again, as though searching for the proper words. He was looking at everything but me. The bar, he finally said. How much of what happened in there do you remember? Somewhere in the margin of nothing, I think. I said, now leaning against the wall for support. You were talking to the bartender, loudly, he said, bouncing up and down on the balls of his feet. I wasn't eavesdropping, not at all. I just happened to overhear. You were talking about some kind of money troubles. I'd almost forgotten about them myself, but the second he said it, all the memories came barreling into me like some nauseating tidal wave. I'd ranted and raved, screamed at the top of my lungs. Debt. 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 I got belligerent when I felt they weren't showing me enough sympathy, and when I got belligerent, I was rightly thrown out on my inebriated ass. Oh, don't worry about those, I said, my cheeks reddening with shame. That's not your problem. I'll deal with it. But Nate, you didn't sound like you could deal with it. What the hell is it to you? I snapped back. The stranger stopped talking and began reaching into his jacket. I got a sudden flash of paranoia that he worked for one of the casinos, and he was going to put a bullet between my eyes. You're my best friend, Nate, he said, and friends are meant to help each other out of sticky situations, aren't they? He retrieved a stack of bills from a pocket in his suit and handed it to me. Will this be enough? He asked. It was at this point that I was most open to the idea of this all being some crazy dream. With the ferocity of a madman, I quickly counted the money this total stranger, calling me his best friend, had handed to me. 20 fucking grand. It could bail me out, and then some. Holy shit, I said, though I can't remember if it was out loud or in my head. I can't possibly accept this. Please do, he said with another ear-to-ear grin. You need it an awful lot more than I do. He then added, a sober me might have been too proud to indulge him, but funnily enough, drunk me had a far more realistic take on my level of desperation. I was a desperate, desperate man, trapped in a corner. Fact the first, when a human being is driven into a corner, You should never underestimate the levels of stupid and dangerous they will resort to in order to escape. But why? Was the only question I could summon. He smiled and shrugged. Because I like you, he said, and I like helping people. But you've only just met me, I cautiously said. So what? A friend is a friend is a friend. Why overthink it? I collapsed back against the wall, holding the stranger's 20 grand. It was a way out of my dire situation. I'll pay you back. Every penny, with fucking interest, I swear to God, I said. The stranger laughed. No need. I've got no shortage of money. Just take it and bail yourself out, okay? Then promise me you'll stop gambling. There were big, swollen tears running down my burning cheeks. The stranger's kindness was baffling, but it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever experienced. He was a true saint in flesh and blood. I'll never gamble another penny, I said. Without another word, I lunged forward and hugged him. A long, warm, tight embrace. By the end, I could feel his emaciated limbs wrapped across my back. Thank you so much, I whispered, my tears dripping onto the shoulder of his suit. What are friends for, right? When I finally prized myself off of him, I just couldn't stop laughing. It was nerves, probably. The stranger watched me, a kind of eccentric joy burning in his big yellow eyes. He seemed to like just observing. Oh, one more thing, he said, reaching into his jacket again. A little something I wrote up in the bar, just to help you out. He passed me a piece of paper, folded into the size of a pamphlet. I didn't even think to check it at the time. I just shoved it into the pocket of my filthy coat and carried on thanking him. I needed that money, Lord knows I did, but I couldn't just take it without giving something in return. There must be something you want, man, I pleaded, palms open in deference to his generosity. Anything. I owe you my life, man. You just name your price. I can't thank you enough. The stranger grinned and stroked his narrow chin in contemplation. Now that's an irresistible offer, he said, almost jokingly. You drive a hard bargain, Mr. Wilson. Leave it with me, okay? I'm sure I'll think of something. He began walking away after that, whistling the melody of the famous pop song Sunshine, Lollipops, and Rainbows. Now I was laughing again, half out of giddiness, half in acknowledgement of the sheer strangeness of the events transpiring around me. Right then, as I sat outside a shitty bar, covered in dirty water, my own tears, and more than a little puke, I was the luckiest human being on the planet. What do you give to the man who has everything? I said aloud. The stranger looked over his shoulder at me one more time, his odd eyes meeting mine. Almost everything, Nate, he corrected. Almost everything. And just like that, the stranger was gone. Almost funny, isn't it? How someone like that can have such a profound impact on your life, then just up and disappear just as quickly. Like a comet, just trailing past. You only catch its light for a brief instant, then it's dark again. Using the stranger's money, I paid off my gambling debts in full, and still had a little left over. I swore to stick to my promise, for my own sake and his. In the 10 years that have passed since that day, I haven't gambled a cent. Once I was all square with the house, I finally took a moment to check the piece of paper that he'd left me with. At first, I only sort of skimmed it, and it didn't make a great deal of sense to me. Just a list of dates from 2007 to 2017, each accompanied by a sentence fragment. It was only when I sat down and took a long, hard look at what those fragments actually were that I realized the stranger couldn't possibly have been human. No, he was so much more than that. It was a list of instructions, specific down to the days, minutes, hours, and seconds, where to be and what to do in order to maximize success at that given moment. He'd left stock tips for companies that didn't exist, but would come into existence exactly when he'd predicted they would. He'd left exact instructions on which house to buy and how to get it at the best price. Clothes to wear, jobs to take, friends to make. 5th of October, 2009. Go to Starbucks in town. Meet Jesse O'Brien, 3:51 afternoon. 2 years later, Jesse O'Brien became Jesse Wilson. The stranger had even engineered me meeting the love of my goddamn life, precise to the exact second we'd first make eye contact. I invested in the right stocks and pulled out of the wrong ones, avoiding company deaths and market crashes like some financial Houdini. My capital skyrocketed, and my personal wealth just grew greater and greater. 8th of June, 2011. Buy house 10 Aspen Way. Don't rent, 6:14 p.m. And so I did. Jesse and I moved into that big, gorgeous house once our honeymoon was over. We were wealthy, healthy, and deeply in love, but something was missing. Something the stranger had accounted for, too. 17th of August, 2012, conceived child with Jesse, 8:31 p.m. Our little girl is called April. The stranger picked it, not me. She's 4 now, and I love her with all my heart. The stranger, a man who I'd known for less than an hour, had steered the entire course of my life in the best possible direction, out of nothing more than the kindness of his heart. He'd saved me. He'd saved all of us. Even though it had been 10 years since that day, and I was drunk out of my mind at the time, I remember every detail vividly. That's why, as I was walking down the street this morning, my arms full of grocery bags, when I heard someone singing "Sunshine, Lollipops, and Rainbows" a few feet behind me, I recognized the voice instantly. Sunshine, lollipops, and rainbows, everything that's wonderful is what I feel when we're together. His melodic voice sang, his tones screaming joviality. Brighter than a lucky penny, when you're near the rain just disappears, dear, and I feel so fine. Without a moment's hesitation, I turned to face him. It looked like that strange man hadn't aged a day in an entire decade. He even wore that same pinstriped suit that he had on the first night I met him. "Just to know that you are mine." He finished the verse with a smile and threw open his arms. "Jesus Christ," I said, my face cracking into a smile impossible to hide. "It's actually you." "The one and only, baby," he said with a laugh and a grandiose hand gesture. "How's Jesse, by the way?" I opened my mouth to answer, but he raised a hand, as though to politely silence me. "I'm sorry to drop in after, gosh, has it really been 10 years? Geez Louise, time really does tend to get away from me," he said. "Anyway, the reason I'm here is because I finally figured out what I wanted from you." "Beg your pardon?" "10 years ago, you said you owed me something, anything," he replied, though I almost heard it back in my own voice as he said it. I couldn't decide at the time, but I think I know now. "Oh, of course. That's wonderful to hear, man," I said, my heart filled with a sudden trepidation. "So, what is it you want?" The stranger gave that same ear-to-ear grin that he was wearing back behind the dive bar in 2007. "Well, I've thought about it for a long time, amigo, and I've finally made my decision," he said. "I know what I want from you, Nate." He paused to take a step closer to me. His eyes were just as golden in the daylight. "I want your name, Nate." I almost laughed to begin with, but I soon realized he wasn't joking. He was deadly serious. "My name?" "Yes, Nate, I've always loved your name. It's so wonderful," he said, wringing his hands with glee. "See, I've never had a name myself, and it's always left me feeling a little left out, you know? I've wanted a name for so long, and I decided just recently that the name I want is yours. I think it'll fit me just right." This man had given me my entire life. He saved me from getting killed by casino sharks back in '07, and every wonderful success I'd had since I owed entirely to his decade-long itinerary. With all this in mind, who was I to turn him down this last batshit crazy request? If he wanted to go around calling himself Nate Wilson too, what right did I have to stop him? "Sure thing, buddy," I said with a smile. He leaned forward and embraced me, almost crushing the groceries against my chest. "You have no idea how happy you've made me. It's the least I can do after all you've done for me," I replied. The stranger, or rather, Nate Wilson, extended another spidery hand towards me. "Let's shake on it," he said, his voice elated, and so I did. We went our separate ways after that. I walked home, and he ran off into the city, singing and cackling with mirth. It brought me some peace of mind to know that my debt to him was finally repaid, and that some simple token gesture was all that I needed to do it. When I arrived back home, I saw April playing around with her toy lawnmower in the front yard. I smiled and called to her, but she didn't respond. She was too wrapped up in her fictitious duties. I made my way inside with the groceries. Jesse was in the kitchen, cutting up carrots. Sunshine, lollipops, and rainbows blasted out of the radio. Today just kept getting weirder and weirder. "Hey, babe," I called to her, putting the groceries on the kitchen table. "You'll never guess who I ran into this morning." Jessie didn't respond. She just carried on chopping and hummed to the tune. "Babe, everything okay?" I asked. Still no response. At this point, I was beginning to get a little worried. With a peculiar heaviness to my every movement, I walked over to Jessie and placed a tentative hand on her shoulder. It just went straight through. Straight though her goddamn body, like she was a hologram or I was. I recoiled with a short, sharp yelp and fell against the kitchen table. Again, no response from Jessie. What the hell just happened? Honey, I'm home! I heard a familiar voice call from the hallway outside. Jessie suddenly perked up, turning her head towards the noise. Hi, sweetie, she said. You were a while out there. I was beginning to get worried. The stranger walked into the kitchen, a smile stretched across his waxen face. Sorry about that, honey bunny, he said. I met an old friend in town. We had a little catch-up. As he said that last part, he threw me a sickening wink with one of his piss-yellow peepers. Is that so? Jessie said. Anyone I know? She leaned forward and gave the stranger a kiss, the kind of kiss she always gave me. You wouldn't know him, the stranger said with a chuckle. I don't think you've ever met him. I felt like my mind was going to implode. Nothing going on was making any kind of goddamn sense. The whole world had gone crazy. April called from outside, something about the grass. You mind taking over the carrots for a sec, babe? Jessie said to the stranger. I better go check on April. No problem, honey, he said, taking the knife from her hand and giving her another kiss. Jessie left the room, leaving just me and the stranger, all alone. I quietly fumed, and he chopped carrots. What the fuck is going on? I finally asked him, when I'd gained the modicum of composure required to do so. What have you done, you crazy fucking weirdo? He carried on chopping the carrots. His eyes never left the chopping board. My name is Nate, stranger, he said. I'd really appreciate it if you called me by it. In my state of fury, I tried to grab him by the shoulder and turn him to face me. I could actually touch him, but he wouldn't budge. It was like trying to move a mountain. That's my name. This is my house, and that's my wife, I said to him, rage and confusion rendering my voice a crackly mess. I want you out of here and out my life. The stranger chuckled. See, that's where you're wrong, Slick. All that changed hands, he said. This is Nate Wilson's house. Jessie is Nate Wilson's wife, and this is Nate Wilson's life. And by the terms of our recent deal, I'm Nate Wilson. And you, good buddy? You're nobody. I won't accept that, I yelled, slamming my hand down onto the kitchen countertop. Without another word, Nate Wilson rammed the knife through my hand. There was no pain, no blood. It just phased through, as though I no longer even existed. Word to the wise, stranger, reality marches on regardless of whether you accept it, he said, as I pulled my hand away from the knife. Everything you have, everything you've tricked yourself into believing you earned, you got from my instructions. You never owned this life, stranger. You just rented it from me, piece by piece. Now it's mine, and there's not a thing you can do about it. He stuck the knife into the chopping board and turned around to me. I'd appreciate if you'd leave us alone now and let me, my wife, and my daughter get on with our lives. Do you understand, stranger? I stood in crushing silence for a minute or two. But can I see them again? I whimpered. Sure you can. You can see them any time you like, but only I can see you. Just like up until around an hour ago, only you could see me. It doesn't feel good, does it? Being nobody. Being nameless. The gravity of it all was finally closing in. I fell onto my ass and began to cry. God, I was so fucking stupid, I said. How did I fall for all this? Nate Wilson shrugged and ate a piece of carrot. Don't blame yourself, buddy, he said. I was waiting for centuries before I found someone who I could interact with. It isn't your fault you happened to be that person, or that you had such an awesome name at the time. See, about your name, you were only going to waste it, friendo. If I wasn't there that night, a heavy would have broken your legs the next day. You'd have gotten into painkillers and overdose a few months later. Nate Wilson becomes gravestone fodder. What a waste that would have been, huh? But what do I do now? I asked, holding back tears. What I did, stranger, Nate Wilson said, eating another piece of carrot with undue relish. Ask around, find someone you can talk to. Might be this afternoon, who knows? Sure, could be a week, month, year, decade, century, but I'm an eternal optimist. A century? I said, trying to ebb the stream of tears flowing out of me. I can't wait that long. You'd be surprised, pal. Patience is something you'll learn, being nameless. When you finally do manage to wrangle yourself a name, you'll appreciate it a little more this time. You'll make something of yourself. Fact the second. If a deal seems too good to be true, it is. So is that it? I asked. Is that all you have for me? Nate Wilson nodded. I'm afraid so, good buddy, he said, but you seem like a nice enough guy. I'm sure you'll figure something out. You can always depend on the kindness of strangers, don't you know? As the man who had just stolen my entire existence carried on hacking up vegetables, I left the room, walking out of the kitchen, through the hallway, then out of the house entirely. I stole one last look at Jesse and April, his family, playing on the lawn, totally carefree, all smiles. They'd never even know that I was gone. Perhaps it was better that way, no heartache. I whispered a goodbye that they'd never hear, and closed my eyes in a pointless attempt to shut off the tears I knew would be coming either way. I set off into the city after that, walking alone in search of something, hell, anything, to call myself. And that was that, the story of my unnaming. Perhaps Nate was right. Perhaps it was his life all along. Maybe he'll live it better, live it kinder. He might be a better father, a better husband, a better Nate. I don't feel so attached to that name anymore. But if you know all this now, that means one good thing. You can read what I'm writing. If you can read my words, perhaps you can hear them. And if you can hear them, perhaps you can reply. If so, I hope to hear from you soon. We have a lot to talk about, you and I a lot to discuss. I think I can do some great things for you, dear reader, dear friend. I'll help you out of any bind you need, and I'll barely ask for anything in return. Barely anything at all. My son looks outside the window every day at 2:12 a.m. Exactly 5 minutes later, there is knocking on the door. It started about a month ago. I woke up in the middle of the night, thirsty as hell. As I stumbled to the kitchen for a glass of water, I noticed a sliver of light coming from Ethan's room. The door was cracked open, and I could see his small silhouette framed against the window. "Ethan," I called softly, pushing the door open. "What are you doing up, buddy?" He didn't turn around. He just stood there, staring out into the darkness. "Ethan?" I tried again, a little louder this time. Finally he looked at me, his eyes wide and unfocused. "Daddy, it's time," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. A shiver ran down my spine. "Time for what, bud?" But he didn't answer. Instead, he climbed back into bed and pulled the covers up to his chin. Within seconds, he was fast asleep. I checked my phone, 2:12 a.m. Weird, but kids do strange things sometimes, right? I tucked Ethan in and went back to bed, chalking it up to a random night terror or sleepwalking episode. The next night, I woke up again around 2 a.m. Call it parental instinct or just paranoia, but something made me check on Ethan. Sure enough, there he was at the window again. I checked my phone, 2:12 a.m. on the dot. This time, I didn't say anything. I just watched him from the doorway. He stood there, perfectly still, for exactly 5 minutes. Then, just as I was about to intervene, a sound pierced the silence that made my skin crawl. 3 sharp raps on our front door. Ethan didn't react. He just climbed back into bed like nothing had happened. With my heart pounding in my chest, I crept downstairs and peered through the peephole. The porch light illuminated an empty stoop. No one was there. I tried to convince myself it was just a coincidence, maybe some drunk teenager playing a prank. But a nagging feeling in my gut told me something wasn't right. For the next week, the same thing happened every single night. Ethan at the window at 2:12 a.m., knocking at 2:17 a.m., no one at the door. I tried talking to Ethan about it during the day, but he had no memory of getting up at night. He just looked at me with those big, innocent eyes and asked if we could have pancakes for breakfast. I was starting to lose it. I wasn't sleeping. I couldn't focus at work. Every night I'd sit on the stairs, watching Ethan's door, waiting for 2:12 a.m. with a mixture of dread and morbid curiosity. One night, about 10 days in, I decided to do something different. At 2:10 a.m., I quietly entered Ethan's room and stood next to his bed. As the clock ticked over to 2:12, his eyes snapped open. He sat up, but when he saw me, he froze. "Daddy," he whispered, "you shouldn't be here." "Why not, buddy?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "Because," he said, his eyes darting to the window, "she's waiting." My mouth went dry. "Who's waiting, Ethan?" But before he could answer, the knocking started. Only this time, it wasn't coming from the front door. It was coming from the other side of Ethan's bedroom window. The knocking stopped as suddenly as it had started. In the eerie silence that followed, I could hear my own ragged breathing and the frantic pounding of my heart. "Ethan," I whispered, my voice trembling, "get away from the window, now." But my son didn't move. His eyes were fixed on something outside, something I couldn't see. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his small hand and pressed it against the glass. That's when I saw it. A hand on the other side of the window, mirroring Ethan's. Long, skeletal fingers with blackened nails. The skin was pale and waxy, like that of a corpse left too long in water. "Jesus Christ!" I yelled, lunging forward to grab Ethan. But as soon as my fingers touched his shoulder, he let out an ear-piercing scream that made me stagger backward. The hand outside the window vanished, and Ethan collapsed onto the floor, his body convulsing violently. I scooped him up, my mind reeling with panic. As I turned to rush him out of the room, my eyes caught something that made me freeze in my tracks. There, scratched into the window glass, were 5 words. "I'm coming for him, John." A wave of dread washed over me. How the hell did it know my name? I ran downstairs with Ethan in my arms, fumbling for my phone to call 911. But as soon as I hit the bottom step, every light in the house flickered and died. In the pitch darkness, I heard something that sent chills down my spine. The sound of nails dragging across wood coming from every direction at once. "Daddy," Ethan whimpered, his small body trembling against mine. "She's inside now." I sprinted for the front door, my free hand outstretched in the darkness. But when I grabbed the doorknob, it was ice cold and slick with something wet. I yanked my hand back, feeling warm liquid dripping down my wrist. The coppery smell of blood filled my nostrils. "You can't leave, John," a voice whispered, so close I could feel fetid breath on my neck. It sounded like Marie, but wrong, like her voice was being forced through a throat full of gravel. "We're a family again," it whispered yet again. "You're not Marie," I choked out, backing away. "My wife is dead." A chilling laugh echoed through the house. "Dead? Oh, John, I'm so much more than dead." Suddenly the lights flickered back on. I blinked, momentarily blinded. When my vision cleared, I saw her. Marie stood at the foot of the stairs, but it wasn't the Marie I remembered. Her skin was gray and bloated, her eyes sunken and filled with a sickly yellow light. Her once beautiful hair hung in wet, rotting clumps around her face. She wore the same dress we buried her in, now stained with dirt and God knows what else. "Marie," I breathed, unable to believe what I was seeing. Her mouth stretched into an impossibly wide grin, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. "I've come to take our son home, John. It's time for Ethan to join me." Ethan squirmed in my arms, reaching out towards the thing that looked like his mother. "Mommy?" he called, his voice a mixture of fear and longing. The creature's eyes locked onto Ethan, and she took a step forward. The floorboards creaked and squelched under her bare, mud-caked feet. "No!" I shouted, clutching Ethan tighter. "You're not taking him." I turned and ran for the kitchen, my mind racing. Salt. I needed salt. Wasn't that supposed to work against spirits or something? As I fumbled through the cabinets, I could hear Marie's wet footsteps getting closer. The air grew cold, and the putrid stench of decay filled the room. "Oh, John," her voice sing-songed from just outside the kitchen. "You can't protect him forever. Ethan belongs with me now." I finally found the salt and turned around, ready to throw it, but what I saw made the container slip from my numb fingers. Marie stood in the doorway, but her body was wrong. Her limbs were elongated, joints bent at impossible angles, her head lolled to one side, neck stretched and distorted, and behind her, writhing in the shadows, were dozens of arms, reaching, grasping. Ethan screamed. In that moment, as I stared into the abyss of that horrifying scene, I knew our lives would never be the same. Whatever was wearing Marie's face, whatever had been coming for my son night after night, it wasn't going to stop, and I had no idea how to fight it. The thing that wasn't Marie lurched forward, its grotesque limbs scrabbling across the kitchen floor. I backed away, clutching Ethan to my chest, my mind blank with terror. My back hit the kitchen counter, and I realized we were trapped. "Please," I begged, though I knew reasoning with this creature was futile. "Please, just leave us alone." The thing cocked its head at an unnatural angle, Marie's once beautiful features twisting into a mockery of confusion. "Leave you alone? But John, we're family, and family should be together, forever." One of its many arms shot out, impossibly fast, grabbing my ankle. I yelped as icy fingers dug into my flesh, the chills spreading up my leg like poison. Ethan whimpered in my arms, his small body shaking uncontrollably. In that moment of pure desperation, something inside me snapped. A surge of protective rage coursed through my veins, burning away the paralyzing fear. I wouldn't let this thing take my son. I couldn't. With a roar, I kicked out at the creature's face. My foot connected with a sickening squelch, and it reeled back, momentarily stunned. I seized the opportunity, charging past it towards the basement door. If we couldn't leave the house, maybe we could find a way to trap it. I slammed the basement door behind us and fumbled for the light switch. The dim bulb flickered to life, casting long shadows across the cluttered space. Ethan clung to me, his face buried in my shoulder. "Daddy," he whispered, "I'm scared." "I know, buddy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But we're gonna be okay, I promise." That's when I saw it. In the corner of the basement, partially hidden behind some old boxes, was a door I'd never noticed before. It looked ancient, its wood warped and stained with age. From upstairs came the sounds of splintering wood and shattering glass. The creature was tearing the house apart looking for us. With no other choice, I approached the mysterious door. As I reached for the handle, Ethan suddenly spoke up. "That's where Mommy comes from," he said matter-of-factly. I froze. "What do you mean, Ethan?" He pointed at the door. "Every night at 2:12, that door opens. Mommy comes out and goes to my window. She says she misses us and wants us to come with her. But I was scared, so I didn't open the window." My mind reeled. How long had this been going on? And why 2:12 a.m.? 2:12 a.m., February 12th, the day Marie died. Before I could process this revelation, the basement door exploded inward. The creature that wore Marie's face came slithering down the stairs, its body contorting in ways that defied physics. "Found you," it hissed, its voice a chorus of whispers. I grabbed the handle of the mysterious door and yanked it open. Beyond it was not the foundation of our house, but a swirling vortex of shadows and mist. The air that rushed out was frigid and smelled of decay. The creature let out an inhuman shriek. "No, you can't send me back! I won't go alone!" It lunged at us, its numerous arms outstretched. In that split second, I made a decision that would haunt me forever. I set Ethan down and kissed his forehead. "I love you, buddy. Always remember that." Then, using all my strength, I shoved the creature towards the open door, but as it teetered on the threshold, one of its arms wrapped around my waist. I looked at Ethan, saw the terror and confusion in his eyes. "Run, Ethan. Run upstairs and don't look back." The last thing I saw was my son's tear-streaked face as the creature and I fell through the doorway into the abyss beyond. I don't know how long I fell. Time seemed to have no meaning in that place of shadows and whispers. But eventually, I crashed onto what felt like solid ground. I opened my eyes to find myself back in my own basement. The old door had vanished, leaving only a blank wall. Sunlight streamed through the small windows. Morning had come. Painfully, I climbed the stairs, calling out for Ethan. I found him curled up on the living room couch, sleeping peacefully. When I woke him, he had no memory of the night's events. It's been a week since that terrible night. The scratches on Ethan's window are gone, as if they never existed. He no longer gets up at 2:12 a.m. To all appearances, our lives have returned to normal. But I know better. Sometimes, late at night, I hear whispers coming from the basement. And in my dreams, I see Marie, the real Marie, reaching out to me from beyond a door I can never open. I don't know if the creature will find another way back. I don't know if it's truly gone or if it's just biding its time. All I know is that every night I check on Ethan at 2:12 a.m. And every night I pray that the knocking doesn't start again.